Hey everybody, welcome back to True Crime with Andy Hale. I am back with David Rose, my new favorite investigative journalist, covering miscarriages of justice. And what I love about him is deep dive, takes a deep dive and gets down in the weeds, knows these cases inside and out. And that's how I think you really can dissect cases, attention to detail. We've been talking about the Lucy Letby case last podcast episode with you. We walked through the circumstances that led to her arrest, her having a trial, and her being convicted of murder of, I think you said 6 of the little babies, an attempted murder of...
Seven murders.
Seven, and then attempted murder of another 7,
well, eventually 7.
Okay.
There was a new trial on one of them.
Sentenced to life without parole. She's in her 30s. Okay. And one of the things that struck me from our last episode was how you said her defense team did not present any medical expert, which I just can't even process how you can't do that. You have your chances to win are slim and none if you have no forensic component in the face of an onslaught of alleged forensic evidence against you. So I know a lot has happened since and recently, but let's take our time. What kind of happens? How does momentum start to build for her after the case? You know, she's sentenced, she goes to prison, and you know that oftentimes for most people that's it. You know, they have an appeal, but that's a tough road to hoe. So what's the first little movement that happens in the case?
Well, I've never known a case like this in this sense, because as you would expect, when she was convicted, when she gets all these life without parole sentences, you know, at first the media goes bananas, and it's, you know, she is the face of evil, the witch, the serial killer monster.
Serial killer. Let me pause there. There is nothing worse. I don't even know if you were writing a screenplay, and I've talked about this, you and I, and we wanted to make, like, what's the most evil thing we could accuse somebody of? Serial killer would probably be at the top of the list. And a serial killer of little babies?
Yeah.
Can we come up with a character more evil than this? Little babies that are in need of care? It's like the worst thing you could be accused of.
Yeah. What happened in this case was there was that initial completely expected outpouring of very negative publicity. But quite soon, a number of individuals began to have doubts and to express doubts. And they began
people like what kind of people? Just John Q. Public or medical people or what?
Some of them are medical people. Some of them were statisticians. Some of them started writing blogs. You know, they sort of began to find each other through the internet. Now, for example, there's a guy who I actually have known for many years called Steve Phelps. Now, Steve Phelps used to be the producer of a BBC TV series called Rough Justice. And Rough Justice was a very high quality show that only came out with 2 or 3 shows a year.
I love that name, Rough Justice. That's
it migrated to Channel 4, where it was then called Trial and Error. But the thing was, it was a show that existed to investigate miscarriages of justice. Now, Steve had retired, but he was very concerned about the Letby case, and he began to sort of reach out to people. And little by little, this sort of team of people began to coalesce around Lucy Letby. There was a statistician called Peter Elston, who, you know, had a pretty high-powered job in finance in which he used his very advanced statistical skills. And he had retired, and he was troubled by this. And he started reaching out to other people. There were, a number of doctors. There's one doctor called Svelena Dimitrova, who is herself a highly skilled pediatrician who works at a hospital in Brighton and has obviously very detailed knowledge of the kinds of things that babies with these conditions go through. And she had been very struck by what she thought was the poor quality of the medical evidence given at the trial. So people began to express doubts. There was also a guy called John Sweeney, a former colleague of mine at the Observer newspaper, and he's done a number of extremely good podcasts looking at aspects of this case. There was just this sense of uneasiness. You know, we had given this woman this ultimate punishment, and yet the evidence always seemed so thin.
It just didn't feel right? Like it was just unsettling.
Yeah. So stuff was out there coming out onto the internet, but at this point, not in the mainstream media in the UK. And the reason for that was that on this case of baby K, the jury had not been able to agree when they delivered their verdicts in 2023. So there was going to be a new trial on just this one charge of attempted murder, baby K. Now,
there was going to be a new trial on that. Why would they even bother? What would be the point?
why would they even bother? Well, the state, the prosecution, the Crown Prosecution Service said it was because they, the family deserved to have closure and all this.
They're going to retry that case?
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason may well have been this. So in Britain, there are very strict laws which prevent you from really doing any kind of reporting that doesn't just say what happened in court. Any kind of investigative reporting of a judicial case is off limits unless, there are no further proceedings pending.
You can't, during a trial, have an opinion about the merits of the case as a third
Absolutely
party?
not.
You
If
can't
do that, you are guilty in Britain of a criminal offence, which is contempt of court, and your editor.
And let me
can
pause
be
you there.
fined.
That's crazy because oftentimes, and I think you and I talked about this with the Carlton Gary case, sometimes you need the media to tell a story of a justice. Sometimes you do need the media to pressure people to do their jobs. Sometimes justice doesn't happen unless a spotlight is shown on the injustice. So I can't believe the media or any person is not allowed to comment and have their own opinions about the merits of what they see transpiring. Anyway,
it's completely off limits in the UK. And I mean, there's a very unpleasant individual called Tommy Robinson, who is the sort of far right extremist. And he is currently serving a jail term for having repeatedly challenged what was being said in various court cases that involve migrants. And he's become a kind of poster boy for the far right. But,
you can only do it. You can only criticize it if there's no pending.
If there's an appeal pending, or there's the likelihood of an appeal, you can pretty much say what you want. But if there's a jury trial pending, you can't say anything.
Okay, so is the fact that they might do a retrial that continues the muzzle media?
Well, the retrial was going to happen. It was scheduled, so it was the British media was effectively gagged at this point. This is the summer of last year. Now, meanwhile, this small group of people who were getting more and more concerned about the case, such as Felina Dimitrova, Peter Elston, Steve Phelps, and others, they'd made contact with a very prominent member of Parliament, Sir David Davis. Now, Sir David Davis is a Conservative MP. He's been an MP for a very long time. He's been a cabinet minister. He served under both Margaret Thatcher and then years later, David Cameron and Boris Johnson. And he's a very, very experienced politician. But not only that, he has for very many years had a strong interest in miscarriages of justice. And he and I have worked together on a number of very high profile cases involving both miscarriages of justice and also abuse of human rights conducted during the war on terror, things like Guantanamo Bay and the use of torture. And he contacted me in the summer of last year saying, David, you need to get involved in this Lucy Letby case. You have a lot of experience here. This is one of the worst cases, or maybe the worst case I've ever come across.
Had you been following the case up to that point?
Only through the media. I'd not followed it in any close way.
Yeah.
Now, in the middle of all that, so I was saying, well, I'm interested, sure. In the middle of all that, the New Yorker published a bombshell article by Rachel Aviv. It's a 13,000-word article, and it completely changed the narrative around Lucy Letby. This was truly a landmark piece of journalism. Not because it actually, it wasn't really that it, I'm sorry, what?
I said I love that because that's what I'm talking about. The media telling a story, having an opinion, and the reason it has traction, good pieces are, they're factually based and they're persuasive.
Yeah.
Well,
it was a deeply researched piece. Assisting Rachel Aviv was a journalist called Calusi d'Oliveira, who actually is now working with me. Yeah, because she knows the case backwards. I mean, she's been involved with it for many, many months. And the thing was, this article, it wasn't that it produced any kind of new revelations as such, or nothing tremendously dramatic, but it just in telling the story in a way that made clear how weak the case against Lucy Letby was.
I got to go back and read that.
Oh, it's essential reading. But here's the thing. So this was published in America. And it was, I mean, you can buy the New Yorker on paper in Britain, and it had been distributed by this point. So, I was able to get a copy. But online, the British government took steps to make sure that this article could not be accessed online in the United Kingdom. And it still can't be.
What?
And that was because this new trial on the case of Baby K was still about to happen. So,
and that's why they brought that case. Don't give me this stuff. Oh, the family needed the justice. Yeah,
exactly. It was to make people. It was to gag people at a time.
Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, eventually, the Baby K trial did take place in the summer of last year. It was a fairly short.
They actually had the trial?
Oh, they did, absolutely. Yes.
Oh, what happened?
She was found guilty and again sentenced to life without parole for attempting to murder Baby K.
Wow.
She also applied.
Let me pause you though. Hold on. The New Yorker article, though, what raised eyebrows? What about it resonated with people?
I think it portrayed the real Lucy Letby, the vulnerable, anguished, committed nurse who had found herself in an appalling situation, was a victim of circumstance, who had not had an ideal defense at her trial, who had been bullied by aggressive older men who maybe had stuff to hide themselves. But above all, it just questioned aspects of the evidence. And, it made you think, you would really sentence someone to life without parole on the basis of what really was nothing more than a suspicion. I mean, the way the case ended up being presented by the prosecution was that if you could not explain a death by saying it's definitely this, then it's unexplained. And if it's unexplained, then it must be suspicious. And if Lucy Letby happened to have been on duty when this baby died or shortly before, then if it's an unexplained death, it must be down to Lucy Letby. So let's try and find a reason or a method how she could have killed this child. And that sort of comes out of the New Yorker piece.
What is your standard over there? What's your burden of proof?
It's exactly the same as yours. It has to be proof beyond reasonable doubt.
Oh my gosh. I thought you were going to come up like, well, we got this weird standard and, speculation and innuendo are sufficient.
And it's the same.
No, I know.
We don't have the unanimous jury verdicts. You can have a majority of 10-2, but that doesn't apply here. So
Baby K, she gets convicted of that.
Yeah.
The New Yorker piece comes out. It portrays her in a more favorable light. So there's a little bit of momentum building in her favor. Yes. And then what happens kind of next?
Well, we're now into the fall of last year, from sort of September onwards. What starts to happen is that major news organizations run investigative pieces that look at parts of the case. So The Guardian did some very good reporting on Dowie Evans, looking at previous cases where he had been acting in a questionable manner, but it also focused on an extraordinary event during the trial. Now, I've never come across anything like this at all, but midway through the trial in January 2024, when this prosecution expert, Dowie Evans, was still on the stand, well, he was being called to the stand on...
Dowie Evans, still my favorite name. Go ahead. Still my favorite
He was
character.
Still very much in the frame. In the middle of all this, a very senior judge, Lord Justice Jackson, who is one of the judges of the Court of Appeal in London, so that's just one level below the Supreme Court, he writes to the judge who is trying the Lucy Letby case, Mr. Justice Gose, and he says, I have to tell you that Dowie Evans recently gave evidence in a case in my court. I found his evidence, and this is the word he used, worthless. Oh. He said that in his view, Dowie Evans had basically made up evidence to suit what his client wanted, and it had no basis.
Wow.
Now, yes. Now, what happened then was that people started looking at other cases in which Dowie Evans had given evidence, and a number of troubling incidents from his career had started to come to light.
And let me pause for people. I'm hoping anybody who is listening to this episode probably has listened to the prior episode, the part 1 of this. But Dowie Evans, just to recap, you had told me injected himself into this case, like volunteered to the police, like, hey, let me help you, right?
This sounds like my kind of case, is what he said.
This sounds like my kind of case. Boy. Yeah.
Amazing.
No red flags there.
No.
Goodness. And you know what the police thought? This sounds like my kind of guy.
Yes.
They had the same feeling.
Exactly.
This sounds like my kind of guy. A match made in heaven.
A lucky day.
Yeah.
Let's have beers.
We found our guy. Fantastic. Yeah. So there's this now. Dowie Evans is a little bit under the microscope. Okay.
Yes.
So now how do things continue to play out? Because we're in the fall of last year. Wow, we're getting pretty close to the present.
Yeah, we are, and it's all been happening. So Sir David Davis MP, my friend, my by far my closest friend in politics, he made a couple of speeches in the House of Commons at this time, which cast doubt on the case. But then the next bombshell came in December. Now, by this time, a new lawyer had taken up the reins, a man called Mark MacDonald, who has a long background in high-profile miscarriage of justice cases. And he
would have been nice to have him involved day one, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, it might have been. Yeah. So he had started, talking to some of these experts who'd volunteered their services.
Oh, talking to medical experts. That's a great idea.
Yes.
Wow. That's a novel concept. Go ahead.
Well, in December, he called a press conference. And at this press conference, he said that medical reports, which 2 experts he had commissioned, cast great doubt on the case advance in the prosecution case. One was baby O, one was baby P, I think it was. No, was it baby O, baby C? Baby O is the important one.
And then, let me pause you. And if you cast doubts on 2 of the 7, the prosecution's theory, it's a serial killer. Yes. All these babies got murdered. So if you can show 1 or 2 didn't get murdered, that's huge. That's huge.
It is indeed.
Yeah. So he has his press conference.
So that got a lot of coverage. And then David Davis followed this up in January with
just January of 2025.
Yes, 2 months ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it was early January. So he made a speech. There's a mechanism by which MPs can move the adjournment. So when the House of Commons gets to the end of its proceedings for the day, with the permission of the Speaker, an MP can make a speech on the adjournment on any subject. And so he used this to look at more detail of these 2 reports of 2 of the babies who had died, 2 of the reports assembled by the new experts. And they were extraordinary. So in the case of baby O, it transpired that according to the expert analysis provided by 2 of these doctors, Slavena Dimitrova and Neil Aiton, both consultant pediatrician, very, very senior physicians, they had concluded that the most likely cause of death of baby O was not anything that Lucy Letby might or might not have done, but the fact that while treating baby O, Stephen Breary, the doctor who was in fact the head of the unit where she worked, had inadvertently stabbed the baby in the liver.
Oh my gosh.
There was pressure in the child's abdomen, which he wanted to relieve, so he stuck a thick needle into the child's abdomen in the wrong place and perforated the liver. And the child then bled copiously. Indeed, I have recently, since that emerged, obtained the coroner's notes, which had previously not been disclosed, when the coroner and the pathologist were looking at this child's death after the post-mortem autopsy. And the cause of death is given, one of the causes of death is given as essentially bleeding out from a wound to the liver.
Wow.
Yes. In the case of the other baby that David Davis highlighted, one of the other doctors in the unit, Ravi Jayaram, the guy who, as we discussed in the first episode of this podcast.
These are the same doctors, by the way, that started pointing the finger early on at Lucy Letby.
Exactly.
Right? We're talking about the same guys.
Ravi Jairam, the guy who had been most assiduous in trying to, as he put it, pique the cops' interest.
Yeah.
He had inadvertently put a breathing tube into a baby in the wrong place and punctured the baby's lung.
What?
Whoa!
I mean, that seems pretty. Breathing tube in the wrong place seems like something you or I might do, but
I don't know about that. I mean, look, I'm sure it's really hard, and these are tiny babies. But
all right, anyway, but it's doctor error that's being pointed out here.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the words that David Davis used in his extremely powerful speech in the House of Commons were that these were clearly episodes of suboptimal care. Well,
yeah, that's about the most polite way you can put it. I would say the doctor's fucked up. Okay.
Yeah. But even that was, more has happened since. So, in early February, I was able to publish an investigative report on Unheard, which looked again at Dr. Dowie Evans, this key prosecution expert. Now, Dr. Dowie Evans, he'd drawn up this chart, and it would help him draw up this chart, which was shown to the jury. It lists all these different occurrences when he says suspicious things took place, which either led to a baby collapsing unexpectedly or dying. And the common factor is that in each and every of these occurrences, 24, I think there were, Lucy Letby is present. But what I managed to get hold of were the records of the meeting kept by the police in October 2017, when Dowie Evans presented his findings on the 28 cases that they had asked him to look at the previous summer. He'd had 3 or 4 months to look at these cases. He met the police to discuss them for 2 days. Now, in this initial list, he listed 28 suspicious occurrences. Some of them involved children who never figured on the indictment against Lucy Letby, offences, incidents with which she never faced charges. But most of them did relate to the cases where she ended up being charged and convicted of murder or attempted murder. But here's the thing. Of the 28 suspicious incidents that he identified to the police, and he went into some detail, he's saying exactly what he thinks has happened. Hand over the face to stop breathing, dislodging a tube deliberately, injecting air. In 10 of the 28 incidents that he identified to the police in October 2017, it just turned out that, oh dear, Lucy Letby was nowhere near. In one case, the baby who she supposedly had attacked hadn't been born when she had last been at work. She'd been off work for several days. She'd never even met this child.
So, what?
And this what happened? All these incidents were just like magicked out of existence. They never featured.
Wow.
No one heard about these incidents in court. They might as well never have happened. Because, of course, if the witch, Lucy Letby, hadn't been president, well, they weren't suspicious at all.
Right.
So that was a bit of a bombshell.
Gosh.
That still isn't the end of the story to date.
Oh my God.
So shortly
Let me just pause you. I'm sorry, but you are amazing because you have these incredible stories of injustice, and I've never like you always amaze me because you'll give me 1, 2, or 3 bombshells, and then you'll always say, "But there's more." Tell me the more.
Okay.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Okay, there's more. So the next thing that happens is in early February, a man called Shu Lee, Professor Shu Lee, convenes a press conference. It's chaired by Sir David Davis MP.
Who is Shu Lee?
I'm about to tell you. And also present is Lucy's lawyer, Martin MacDonald. Okay, so Shu Lee is an eminent pediatrician in Canada. He's the president of the Canadian Neonatal Network. He has produced innumerable research papers over his long and distinguished career. He's been both an expert practitioner and a very distinguished academic researcher. Now, a paper he had written in 1989 became a key part of the prosecution case against Lucy Letby. According to Dowie Evans, the prosecution expert, and also according, curiously, to Ravi Jayaram, the doctor who was writing these emails when they were trying to get the cops to investigate, this paper showed that babies had been deliberately injected intravenously with air. And the reason they said that was that when babies injected with air, were falling sick as a result, experiencing what was called an air embolism, basically an air gap in the blood vessels, their skin developed a certain sort of blotchy, mottled appearance. Shuley read media reports of the trial, saw that his paper had been cited as important evidence because they claimed that these babies had these signs, and he just went berserk. He was furious because, in his view, this was a complete misreading of what he had said in this paper. And so he did something absolutely extraordinary. First of all, working again with the defense lawyer, Mark MacDonald, he assembled an expert panel of 16 neonatal pediatric experts, some of 16? The most eminent in the world, to review all the case notes of the children in the Lucy Letby case. And he presented the findings of this panel at this press conference with Sir David Davis and Mark MacDonald in February. And the findings are devastating. In the view of the panel, none of the children of which she was convicted of attempting to murder or murdering had in fact died from anything other than either poor care, suboptimal care, or natural causes. Not one of the cases which the prosecution had used were in fact homicide or attempted homicide. But he also said something else.
Hold on. This is where I tell my podcast producers, let's insert the sound of the bomb exploding. What exactly. A bombshell. 17 world-renowned experts have 16. Said in this report at this press conference that none of these babies were murdered.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
But it goes even further. So
how can it go further?
So, as I say, the prosecution, Evans, and also Dr. Jayaram at the unit had all made much of this, this mottled, blotchy skin being evidence of air embolism. Well, what really got to Shuley was that he had not said that air embolism injected through an intravenous or administered through an intravenous injection of air would cause this. He'd said it was only if it was via an artery. Now, obviously, it's very difficult to inject anything into an artery. And they were talking about intravenous. So what he did, as well as assembling this panel, he began a new study. And he looked at data from around the world. And he published a paper in a prestigious peer-reviewed journal in December of 2024, which showed that not in a single case anywhere in the world had this blotchy skin symptom shown up as evidence of an intravenously administered air embolism.
Wow.
So it completely shot away one of the principal prosecution arguments that she had injected air into babies' veins and that this was shown by the blotchy appearance.
So this press conference just happened weeks ago?
It happened 4 weeks ago, I guess. And you know what? I mean, I've been a journalist a very long time, and I have never attended a press conference like it. I happen to know, because he's a friend of mine.
You were there?
Oh gosh, yes.
Wow.
I was right at the front.
Did you know what was going to be what was coming out? Did you kind of get a heads up?
I knew that it was going to be an expert report. I had no idea it was going to be so devastating.
So you're sitting there kind of like your jaw hits the floor?
Absolutely. Not only that, David Davis's jaw hit the floor. So David Davis told me that he had to go to a funeral of an old friend, a former MP, and would have to leave after 1 hour. Do you know how long that press conference lasted? 2.5 hours. I mean, I have never seen anything like it. Shu Lee,
Wow.
Canadian expert, he stood there with PowerPoint slides.
So this is like attending a medical conference. Like we're gonna educate you. We're gonna go through the medical points.
Exactly.
Wow.
And you know, there must have been 300 people in that room. There were TV crews from all over the world. Every major British news outlet was there. And everyone was riveted. And people just couldn't leave. I mean, even after the formal presentation ended, people were just talking with each other and with Shu Lee and with David Davis and with everyone. And it was just, I have never experienced anything quite like it.
Oh my gosh. So that happens just 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Now what? What's the status now today?
Okay.
And we're recording this, on March. What's today? The 5th. March 5th.
Yeah.
We're recording.
So where we are now is Lucy Letby has tried to appeal. She has submitted what is called an application for permission to appeal to the Court of Appeal, and they've turned her down. And the ruling, the judgment that they issued in refusing to basically have evidentiary hearings and go through the whole process of reopening the case is very negative. One of the grounds which she had advanced was that after it had emerged that that this Lord Justice of Appeal, a senior judge, had actually written to the trial judge saying that the prosecution expert Dowie Evans had given worthless evidence, that should in itself have been, enough to reopen the appeal. But the Court of Appeal decided that this was not an arguable point, which is very disappointing. So,
well, that was all done before this press conference, though, right? Is there going to be some kind of going to be some kind of new attempts to?
Okay, so there are big differences when you get to this point. Effectively, this is the same in America as trying a direct appeal. You lose your direct appeal. In America, you then can still do a number of things. You can file a habeas corpus petition. You might go to the Supreme Court and get cert and get an order to reopen the case or even order a new trial. But in the UK, the way it works, and has done since the mid-1990s, is you can't really go back to court. It's almost impossible to go back to the Court of Appeal and ask them to reverse their earlier decision, unless it's on a very narrow kind of procedural basis. So what you have to do is you apply to a body which is not, as it were, a judicial body. It's essentially part of the executive branch of government, and it's called the Criminal Cases Review Commission. And so the Criminal Cases Review Commission has investigators, it has commissioners who are the people who make the decisions, and they have the power to send the case back to the Court of Appeal if they think that there is, and this is the test they have to apply, if there is a realistic possibility that the Court of Appeal might reverse the convictions and either grant a new trial or just quash the whole case and free the defendant, then they can do that. Now, the CCRC, as it's called, it's been in existence, as I say, since about 1997. It's completely overwhelmed by the volume of work that it gets. It gets well over 1,000 applications a year. They've gone up steadily since it's been in existence, and its resources in real terms have been cut. It's always been a victim of budget cuts. So often it takes an incredibly long time to reach a decision. There was recently a case, very high-profile case, in which a man called Andy Malkinson was set free after an appeal, where he was able to show that a DNA test had proved that he couldn't have committed the rape for which he was convicted. It took 17 years for that to happen. But
my goodness.
Yeah, but the CCRC had that case for over 10 years. And it took them 10 years to order the DNA test. That could have been.
Let me pause you here, though. But you're talking about the obstacles that you have in court to get some kind of post-conviction review. The government, the prosecutor's office can't they just drop the case if they want? You don't have to go to courts. I mean, you don't have to.
Not in quite the same way as you could in America. No. I mean, if the prosecution decided the Crown Prosecution Service, as it would be, if it decided that it wanted to see the case quashed, it could write to the CCRC saying we would like to see this case back in the appeal court, and we
that would
will
carry some weight, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, it would carry huge weight. And there have been cases where something like that's happened. I mean, one of the biggest cases I was involved with as a young reporter was a case of 4 men who were convicted of bombing pubs in Guildford in southern England. In fact, 3 men and 1 woman who were supposedly IRA terrorists. And, the case was a mess. But eventually, new evidence did come to light, and the state offered no resistance. The prosecution said,
"Is that a possibility here that the state could say, you know what, the state's going to ignore that panel of 17 experts,
I think it will
put their head in the sand and be like, we don't care"?
I think I would be amazed at this stage if the prosecution did that. I mean, this is where you need the public swelling of outrage and the media telling the story and calling for justice. That's when you need like the ground swelling of support. Yeah, exactly right.
I mean, how can that press conference not have just cratered the entire prosecution and conviction?
Well, it undoubtedly had a massive impact. I mean, and my own story, on Unheard, showing that, originally the prosecution expert had identified all these suspicious occurrences when Lucy Letby couldn't have been part of it. That had an impact too. It got, a lot of readers. So I think public consciousness has shifted substantially, and quite a lot of well-known people have come out making statements supporting Lucy Letby. I mean, one of them is a man called Ken MacDonald, who's a member of the House of Lords, so he's Lord Ken MacDonald. He's a former director of public prosecutions, that is to say, the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. And so for him to say that is a big deal. And, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, he is a former director of public prosecutions. Now, he said nothing to indicate that he would support such a thing. But, this is a government that I think does take law and justice seriously. But there is one big problem with getting this case back into the Court of Appeal.
One big problem. What is that?
Well, the big problem is this, that, we come back to Lucy Letby's defense. As we've already commented on in part 1 of this podcast, it was remarkable that they didn't call an expert.
Yeah, I think I know what you're going to say. Go ahead. I think I know what you're going to say. Go ahead.
It was a small town solicitor who was instructing, a barrister who maybe didn't have quite enough experience, strategically got things wrong in this case. The problem is that the Court of Appeal often says, well, you could have done all this stuff before.
Exactly. Yeah. The
medical experts, okay, my expert's better than your expert. Well, we didn't hear from these experts at the trial, so it's too late.
Yeah.
And the other thing they can say is, well, if you look at things like, the evidence that I showed, that what Dowie Evans had first told the cops, well, that evidence was there. It was in statements that were part of it.
This is what I was afraid of, because what that expert panel, that 17 experts, what they did, it's not technically new evidence, because anybody, they could have done that back at the time of the trial. They could have done it before the trial. You could have got those expert opinions, previously. And it doesn't satisfy, most likely, the technical requirements for a post-conviction review. But that's where I go back to, let's put the courts aside. Let's take the case. We don't have to stay. The conversation doesn't have to be what are the hurdles in court. The conversation is what is justice, what is right, what is equitable, what is fair. And the prosecution and we would call it the state here. I don't know what you would call it over there. The state can relook at the case and say, you know what? We got it wrong. We got it wrong. We're sorry. We now agree with this new panel of experts, this forensic report. This conviction cannot stand, and we're going to vacate it without going to the courts. I mean, that's over here. That's what happens sometimes. I mean, it's still a fight because, state's attorney's office never want to admit they screwed up. Yeah. But if it's a compelling case where that justice was not served and this woman should not be in prison and should never have been convicted and didn't kill any babies and is not a serial killer, then the state and the prosecution needs to do the right thing and do everything in their power to get that conviction unwound. Whatever you have to do over there to do it. That's a tragedy.
Yeah, that's what I think too. And I mean, the Court of Appeal does, in legal terms, have the power to do this. If it believes it's in the interests of justice, it can quash this conviction anytime it wants. So, yeah, that's where we are. There's
wow.
There's.
But what I'm saying is, it shouldn't have to go to the courts. I mean, it shouldn't be. If I'm who is the decision maker? Like who? So here in my Chester Weger case, for instance, okay, that I'm fighting, I'm dealing with the Will County State's Attorney's got appointed as a special prosecutor to represent the state of Illinois. Okay, they have the power to vacate that conviction today.
Yeah.
Today, if that state's attorney's office felt like my evidence proved Chester Weger's innocence, they could vacate it today. They don't need the court's permission. That office can vacate it. Okay, I don't have to go to court. I'm only in court because they won't vacate it. So who over there would be the equivalent of a prosecutor's office who could say, we don't have faith in this conviction. It's not based on proper science. We want to vacate it.
I don't.
Is anybody?
You just can't do that here. The only thing that can happen is if, the Crown Prosecution Service, it would have to be the probably the Director of Public Prosecutions, but also maybe the Attorney General could ask the Court of Appeal to quash the conviction. They could ask the Criminal Cases Review Commission to put the case back into the Court of Appeal, and that's
what needs to happen.
Yeah.
That's what needs to happen, and that's where the pressure should come. There should be a campaign to get those bodies to do exactly that, to do their job, to consider the new, credible, powerful forensic evidence, and to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I mean, to argue some hyper technicality that we haven't satisfied the standards, blah 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 blah. When if it looks like from that expert panel of 17 people, forensically, this case cannot stand. Then at the very least, I think you got to say, if you're not even willing to go so far as to say she should be released, okay, say, let's have a round two. Yeah. Let's let this be presented with this forensic evidence. Is that not fair and just?
Sure.
Because this lady's going to die in prison, going to spend half a century in prison and die there, potentially for something she didn't do?
Exactly. I mean, I think we're a very long way from that for this reason. So while there's a lot of journalists, some very experienced senior journalists who are now very much of the same mind as you and me on this, there are still kind of cheerleaders for the prosecution. The BBC, which is obviously a hugely important media outlet in the UK, has been extremely anti-Lucy Letby. The reporter who covered this trial for them, their northern correspondent, Judith Moritz, is a die-hard believer in Lucy Letby's guilt. And there are others. And the other issue here is, something which I have to say disgusted me. One thing we've not talked about very much is something that Shu Lee in this report by the experts said very emphatically, was that, it wasn't just that there were doctors who were guilty of poor care, but also there was evidence that the unit in the hospital was, of a very poor standard. I mean, at one stage, there was a kind of superbug infection running rampant on this unit because the cleaning standards weren't good enough. Shu Lee commented about this, that, in Canada, a unit which was performing this poorly would have been shut down. But the trouble is this. So there, and by the way, we've had other scandals in the UK where other hospitals have shown large increases, spikes in deaths of young children. And it's turned out, nobody said anything about serial killers. It's been about, lack of cleanliness. It's been about poor care. It's been about, incompetence. So we have a very high profile health secretary in the government here, Wes Streeting. And Wes Streeting was on a popular talk show a couple of weeks ago, answering questions partly from the public, partly from the talk show host, and he was asked, well, what about the Lucy Letby case? There's mounting evidence about, poor care, crisis at the hospital, lack of resources, and so on. And he went into this tirade about how it was outrageous that people were questioning these verdicts in the media and trying to replay this trial, in this non-judicial way. We have a judicial system. It works. It has decided she's guilty.
Yeah.
It has decided she doesn't get an appeal. End of story.
Tell that to Carlton Gary.
Yeah, exactly. And this was, very disappointing, frankly, because, this is a Labour government. It's supposedly a progressive left-wing liberal government. And here is this guy basically saying, the courts don't get it wrong. Well, as you and I, only too well they do.
Well, and I think here, to me, I didn't see the press conference. You were there. It sounds powerful. It sounds similar to me. Obviously, it's not as definitive as a DNA result, but I say it's akin to a DNA result in that, let's just say, in the Lucy Letby case, what came out was something a little bit different. We now collected DNA from each of the babies' necks, and it was from a unknown male profile who didn't work in the hospital. Okay, and there's no explanation for why this person's DNA would be on there unless they were doing something nefarious with these little babies. Or we even tied it, let's take it one step further. We tied it into some, crazy serial killer person. You mean to tell me that nothing would happen? The government would just say, well, she had her trial. Sorry we didn't learn about that forensic evidence at the trial, but that's our justice system.
I think if something that definitive did happen, I think that would be a very difficult position to defend. I mean, the good thing is that Wes Streeting has no role whatsoever in the case. He is not in any kind of department that has any connection with the courts or the legal system. Nevertheless,
but I think there is that strength. I think from what you described, I mean, it does sound indefensible to me. It sounds like you'd have to really, really do some gymnastics, some mental and forensic gymnastics to make an argument that she actually is a serial killer and killed all these little babies.
Yeah.
You've got these 17 experts compared to Dowie Evans.
Yeah.
I don't know. It sounds like a colossal injustice, what you've described. You know the case better than me. I'm impressed with your integrity and your investigative reporting skills. I just hope that she gets further examination of her case. I hope that she gets a court of appeal to re-examine the case. She deserves that. So where do we go from here? We wait?
Well, so the CCRC has, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which has the power to send the case back to the Court of Appeal. It was very stung by the criticisms that flowed after this Andy Malkinson case, the guy who was exonerated after 17 years of rape on a DNA test. And I think it's keen to try and show that it takes these cases very seriously and is trying to do the right thing. So, interestingly, even before Lucy Letby's new lawyer, Mark MacDonald, actually submitted a formal application, they contacted him saying, we want to look at this case. We've already appointed a team and we want to read through the case papers. So I think they are taking it seriously.
That's promising.
It is promising.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's going to take at least a year. I think that would be a very optimistic time frame. And of course, we don't know that they will, in fact, take what I believe to be the right decision. So, it's going to be a protracted process. But I do also think that, investigative reporting and trying to, influence public opinion will play an important role.
Yeah. It's vital to educate, it's vital to advocate, and it's vital to shine a light on cases of injustice that people might not be aware of. And think about the cases out there. This is what I think about. Lucy Letby was such a well-known case because there were so many babies died.
Yeah.
But think of all the cases out there where it's one murder It's a murder of somebody that's insignificant. It's a case nobody cares about as a society. And so there's not any journalistic resources given to that case, and there's no reason to re-examine it. You know, there could be somebody out there who didn't have forensic evidence presented in their defense that they could have. They had a poor lawyer, and they got convicted of a crime, and it's not on anybody's radar screen because it's in a little town, in a little place, and nobody cares about it. And they shut the cell bars, they turn out the lights, and the case dies.
Yep.
You know, she's just lucky that it was such a high-profile case that that it is getting so much attention that it can be examined and there's interest in it. So I'm encouraged that the CCRC is, did I say that right, CCRC?
Yeah.
I'm encouraged that the CCRC has indicated a willingness to take a look at things, to re-examine things. Let's hope it continues to go down that path. Let's take a look. Let's make sure we got it right. Let's get into it. So, David Rose, thank you so much. I could talk to you for days and days and days. Let's come back on here if there's a development. Yeah. We'll see where things go. It sounds like it's going to take some time, but I'll fasten my seatbelt and I'll get ready. I'll be here. When you're ready with an update, we'll get back on here. We could talk about it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was great talking to you, and thank you everybody for tuning in to another episode of True Crime with Andy Hale.